And so this morning we're going to be looking at the parable of the Good Samaritan. I'm sure we've all heard about the parable of the Good Samaritan, whether in Sunday school but this morning you'll hear about the parable of the Good Samaritan. Finally, Luke 10, verse 25 to 37. And it says this: On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus then responded and said, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Extremely important question to ask this morning. In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out two money. That was the money in those days, and gave it to the innkeeper. "I'm glad you guys are following. Look after him," he said. "And when I return, I will reimburse you for an extra expense you may have. Which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers?" The expert in the law responded, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." This is the word of the Lord to us this morning. Thanks be to God. It is such an awesome thing to always go back to a Sunday school story. Because in the Sunday school stories, we often get taught a specific thing and there's a specific message. But when we're older and we dig a little bit deeper into these messages, there is something so profound for us to hear as adults and as the church this morning. First and foremost, I must just say that the people who were the likeliest to stop didn't stop. There was three people: the priest and the Levite, and the Levite was the head of worship in those days, and then there was the Samaritan. And I must just perhaps begin by stepping on toes, because that is the reputation that we have as the people in the world. If the world sees brokenness, who do they associate the healing and helping hand to? Is it the church? I hope it's a yes. Because we need to be challenged not only by the Samaritan, but we need to be challenged by the priest. And I'm not talking about Reverend Jeff and Cindy who led the worship this morning. I'm talking about us as the church of Christ. Us as the church. Because we have a reputation to be holy, representing the Lord on the outside, but so cold on the inside. It sort of reminds me of the letter to the church in Sardis. You have the reputation of being alive, but you're dead. And maybe I'm stepping on toes early this morning, but we need that. Are we the help in a dark and broken world? Have you received light this morning through Jesus? I don't have any yeses. Yes. Why aren't we being the light? Why aren't we being the hands and the feet? We see a dark and broken world, and yet the first thing we want to do, no, somebody else will do that. Don't get involved. If I get involved, they're going to want something else from me, and then it's a long, there's always T's and C's to the help that we give, isn't there? Always T's and C's. And yet Jesus has no T's and C's. Yet he has no T's and C's in his life given to us on a cross. His ministry throughout his earthly days, there were no T's and C's to them. I want to do it because I love. And Jesus' response, and I really love that the expert in the law asked the question, because it answers a very important question for us today. Who is your neighbor? Any of you have a good neighbor? Some of us have bad neighbors. I almost became ungodly because my backdoor neighbor told me that he wants to poison my dogs. And so then very quickly I thought, Dylan, you are a churchgoer, don't... My wife said, what? He said, what? I'm glad my neighbor still lives. But we all have a neighbor. And we so often associate the neighbor with the easy person to love, isn't it? It's easy to love your easy neighbor, but it's so difficult to love your difficult neighbor. And perhaps your neighbor is not the person who's sitting next to you, but perhaps your neighbor that Jesus is referring to this morning is sitting in the church. And you must hear that, because there is so often rift and drift within the church that we need to sort out. And when Jesus is speaking, and he's saying there's a Samaritan who stops, the Samaritans and the Jews hated one another. They did not like one another one single bit. And so we have a Samaritan who stops. The least likeliest person to stop stops. But the priest and the Levite, the churchgoers, don't. And so this morning I really want to challenge you with reputation and character. Your reputation is what people think of you. And your character is who you are. And you know what creates reputation? Character. If I've got a good character, I display good reputation. I will get a good reputation. Dylan is a good guy. Well, we don't know. But unfortunately, we all want reputation, don't we? We want to have a good reputation as the church, don't we? But is our character right? Does our character display the love of Jesus to a dark and broken world? Because the message is love the Lord your God with what? With all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, all your strength. And then what? Love who? Your neighbor. Are we displaying the love of Christ with regards to our character to a dark and broken world? That's the response that Jesus then says, well, this is your neighbor. This is who it is, just to define who your neighbor is. But the key message is love the Lord. Love your neighbor. And you know what, church? The biggest thing that I've come to realize is this. I'm imperfect, loved by a perfect God, unconditionally. Why is my love for the world not unconditional? The love that I've received, why am I so short to give it out? Why am I so holier than thou to want to share it with the least likeliest person? The person I like the least. Because I've got my select few that I like to love, isn't it? Or help, or do, or, you know, we got our circle. You phone me anytime and I'm there. We've said that before, haven't we? And the other people? And the other guys? I once stood at the side of a robot begging for money for the church to make blessing blankets. It was a rather humbling experience, I must just say. And I must just add, are there any taxi drivers this morning? No, I'm asking that because it's very interesting. You know that the taxi drivers were the guys who asked, what are you guys doing here? No, we're making blessing blankets for the poor. Oh, no problem, he has money. The least likeliest people gave us, I don't know, the taxi driver. Every morning he would stop and he would give us money. Every morning. And one day I saw a church leader that time. And I saw him. Yes, he's going to stop, he's going to ask, he's going to, you know what he did? Don't see me. Don't see your youth trying to make money to buy blankets and make blankets for the poor. And I was heartbroken. I was shattered. How is a church leader, and it's not Reverend Jeff, don't worry. This was many years ago. And it wasn't any of the ministers, just saying, okay? Many years ago. How does a church leader not at least stop and say, hey, I know you guys, like, what are you guys doing? But I feel that is so much us, isn't it? We see the man on the side of the road, and we will choose to be the priest and the Levite, and we'll just drive by. I've had the privilege of preaching to the homeless at the evening service, and it's taken this experience that I experienced a few years ago to a different level, because I cannot be the one who preaches to them on a Sunday and yet ignores them at the robot on the Monday. Who am I then? What am I? I'm just being like the priest and the Levite. You are holy on the outside, but inside you are cold. And you know what, church? The reality is, and I just want to touch on the guy, it just takes a wave, acknowledgement. You don't have to give people things, just, I see you. I know you there. Jesus sees you. And me as the church, I see you. I know you there. And the guys that I see that I minister to on a Sunday evening, they don't ask for things. They're just so happy that I said, hello, that's it. I have acknowledged a being, a human being, somebody that Jesus has created, somebody that God has created. Oh, we miss it. We really miss it because we are so comfortable. I do not want to open up my heart or my life to those people. Why? You know where Jesus would be? Not here. He would be out there with those guys on the side of the street. Why are we not doing that, church? Why? And so I pray this evening, listen to me, I pray this morning that we would not be the priest or the Levite. That we would come out of our little comfort bubbles and comfort zones and actually start to be a church that God has called us to be. To be the hands and feet that Jesus really was. He wasn't comfortable in the heated sanctuary. It's good that we are together as family. He was the hands and the feet, getting uncomfortable, doing the dirty work. Dirty work. Loving, healing, displaying miracles, showing grace. That is the church of Christ. Mahatma Gandhi once said this. He said, I love your Christ, but I don't like your Christians, because your Christians are nothing like your Christ. Hard words, isn't it? But words that we need to hear. Because are we displaying Jesus as those who have been called to be like Jesus? Are we displaying who our teacher is? The one who loves us is? Our Savior, our friend? Are we displaying Him in the right light as we should? I often look at my life and I'm like, I'm so far from that. I need to do a little bit of soul searching. Am I being Jesus to a dark and broken world? And so the Samaritan stops. And the Samaritans, as I've said, did not like the Jews at all. And with the Samaritans stopping, there is a space of action. And that is where I want to begin this morning. I pray that we would be Samaritans. Am I a good Samaritan? No, I'm far from it. But I do believe that when Jesus says, go and do likewise, He's calling us to go and do likewise. And it's very interesting that the teacher of the law did not say the Samaritan. He said the one who showed mercy. He didn't even want to mention the word Samaritan. He didn't want to, because it was a little bit of a Samaritan helped the Jew. That's unheard of. Why would no? The one who showed mercy. Mercy is a space of compassion and forgiveness. That's the dictionary meaning. But He stopped. How many of us don't stop for a moment? Life is busy. I need to be here. I need to be there. I need to do that. I live a life just like that so often, and I don't take a breath. Just stop for a moment. Yes, we see the need. Yes, there is a need. Yes, we need to do something about it. Yes, we need to be the hands and the feet, but I need to get somewhere else. It's fine. Somebody else will come in and somebody else will. Next thing the Samaritan does is he sees. The word says he saw. I want you to close your eyes for a moment. The neighbor, I'll see a few open eyes. Close your eyes. Close your eyes. Close your eyes. Okay, I want to do a quick test this morning. Your neighbor next to you, no cheating, came into the church this morning wearing clothes. So I hope. I've seen everybody wearing clothes. I want you to whisper in their ear the color jersey that they're wearing. Don't look. Don't look. Don't look. Okay, I want you to whisper in the ear the type of shoes that they're wearing. And the color shoes they're wearing. Don't look at what shoes they're wearing. Don't look at the color or the type of shoes that they're wearing. Oh, I've got a few. Oh. But a lot of you are cheating. I see people going underneath the chairs to check. Yo, you're wearing pink shoes. You're wearing How many of you got it right? Honestly got it right. I see a few crossed arms. I don't know if your hands are cold or if you're upset because your neighbor didn't get it right. We do offer marriage counseling. The reality is you came in to church this morning probably with your neighbor. You greeted your neighbor. You said hello to your neighbor. You saw your neighbor, didn't you? And yet you do not take notice of what your neighbor is wearing. Just let that sink in for a little bit. We see, but we don't see. Our eyes are made to see, and it is a blessing to have sight. It is a blessing to have sight. If I take these off, I don't see much at all. It's a blessing to have sight, but we see not to see. We see because, and that's how we live our lives. To those who were honest and didn't put your hand up, I encourage you now to look at your neighbor. Properly look at your neighbor. Look at what they're wearing. You saw them, didn't you? Church, we need to get this right. The Samaritan stopped. And he saw a need. He saw a need. And you're going to say, but that was easy to see. No, it wasn't easy to see because the priest and the Levites saw and they did nothing. The Samaritan stopped. He saw and he did something. The reality is our lives are like this. We got tunnel vision. We see because we need to see and that's it. We don't want to go beyond what there is to actually see. We don't ask the question, but why? I see that, but why? How? That's not right. No, because our lives are so busy focusing on the things that we need to see for ourselves, for what we need to do, for what we need to be. They always say, stay focused and read. No. Look around a little bit. Stop for a moment and look. When you go to work tomorrow, I pray that you don't look at your boss up and down, but stop for a moment and see, not just to see. Because there is so much need within our lives that we don't even stop to see the hurt on somebody else's face. There doesn't have to be a major need. It's just looking at somebody and saying, you don't look good. And if you're like Reverend Jeff, and I said, Rev, you don't look, and he says, well, thank you. I know that. But we need to see. Because the next line is, the next point is very important. But without us not seeing, we cannot display the next point. Nehemiah, and this is not the next point, Nehemiah heard about the walls. He wept, he prayed, he went, he saw the wall. He didn't turn around and say, this is too much of a great task. I'm not going to get involved. Somebody else will come and do it. We're going to turn around and I'll go back and be the cupbearer of the king. That's a nice job. That's a lacquer job. Not really. Drink a glass of poison, but you're well respected. And now I'm going to go and I need to rebuild the wall, but I'm going to have competition. I'm going to have this. And that's what we do, don't we? We sit and we're like, what are we going to do now? How much is it going to cost? How much time is it going to take? And where are we going to go from here? But why? Nehemiah went, saw the need, did what he needed to do, got everything, and he did what he was called to do. We miss it. I had the blessing and privilege to go to India. Sorry, Rev, I have to include it. And as I was ministering to those in India, no, Susan was not there. I didn't ask for Susans there. Next trip I will. Are there any Susans here this morning? Okay, I can use Susan later. Perfect. There's a prayer I'd pray every morning. My wife is testimony to that prayer. Oh Lord, give me eyes to see what you see. And break my heart for what breaks yours. And you know what the Lord did? Oh, he gave me eyes to see what he saw. And he broke my heart for what broke his. And I can imagine that wasn't the full extent to that breaking. Because I think the Lord would cripple me if he broke my heart exactly as to how it breaks his heart. Dylan, I'm going to break your heart, but not to the extent it breaks mine, because then you're going to lie, you're going to be crippled, and you're not going to be able to do the work I've called you to do. How many of us pray a prayer, Lord, just give me eyes to see what you see? Give me eyes to see the outside of my little world that I've created, my little bubble that I have. Give me eyes to see a need in somebody's life. Give me eyes to see a need in somebody's life at work. We can minister to people at work. Not only on the side of the road, at work, in the church, there's need. Are we humans here this morning? We need Jesus. We need each other. We need family. We need togetherness. But we're not asking, Lord, give me eyes to see somebody in the congregation this morning who needs just a hug. No, we're done. Thanks, good, cool, going home. And we miss the place where we can ask, oh Lord, give me eyes to see. Oh Lord, you call me to be a part of an awesome ministry, that you call me, a sinner, to be your hands and feet on earth. Church, that is an honor and that is a privilege. You are not perfect. And yet the Lord chooses you and uses you to further his kingdom here on earth. Why are we not getting involved, church? Priest, Levite? I pray that we would leave here as Samaritans, as good Samaritans. And I must just humble us for a moment. When we've done something, I don't want you to say, I've been a good Samaritan. No. I've done what is expected of me as the church of Christ. That's what is expected of us. To be hands, to be feet, to be Jesus. Not a label. And so what happens when we stop and we see? The Samaritan then what? Had pity. Showed compassion. And you know what Jesus did throughout his earthly ministry? And there is no other greater example than Jesus to use as the one who showed compassion. There are numerous amounts of scriptures where we can read about Jesus showing compassion. How many of us have compassion? It's important to ask, because we live lives and we live in a world that has no compassion. We see something, it's fine, we'll carry on, or you'll be fine. And no. Who has compassion? And there's so many great examples of Jesus showing compassion, and so many parables in which Jesus too shows compassion. Any of you remember the parable of the prodigal son? We all remember it. The son gets his inheritance. He goes, he spends it all out. He's in the pig pen. He has an aha moment. Reverend Jeff once preached about an aha sermon series. Everyone remember? Thank you. You preach well, Rev. They all remembered that. But the father, it says, now I'm going to paraphrase, was sitting, and as he what? He saw his son from afar coming. He had compassion. Compassion. He saw, and his response was compassion. That's Jesus pretty much giving us a glimpse of the Father who is in heaven this morning. Maybe you are the son that is away and astray, or the daughter that is away and astray. I want you to hear this, that there is a Father in heaven who has compassion for you. He sees you. He sees you there in the pig pen. And he's waiting for you to have an aha moment. I'm more than this. I've been called to more than this. I'm in the pig's mess. There's another word I can use. But there's more. The Father is waiting for you. There is compassion in his heart for you. You know what else happens in that story? He gets put on a robe, he gets put shoes, he gets a ring, and you know what? There's a fattened cow. There was a space in which the Father was waiting. The Lord is waiting for you. He's waiting for you. That's the one side. But on the other side, he saw and had compassion. Do you see and have compassion? Or do you see and just drive on? Or do you see and just say, oh, somebody else will deal with that? Because that's our response most of the time, isn't it? As the Levite and the priest, I'm sure, are very busy with church things. I must just say, I'm sure we are often so busy with church things. And we miss the need in front of us. Jesus and the leper. Now a leper came to him, imploring him, kneeling down to him, saying, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Then Jesus moved, there's an action, with compassion. He moved with compassion, stretched out his hand and touched him and said to him, I'm willing, be cleansed. And as soon as he had spoken, immediately the leprosy left him and he was cleansed. Any of you remember the story of the 5,000? Does Jesus show compassion to them in that story? Or do we just read about the 5,000 and the miracles that we see? No. Jesus departed from there by a boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the multitudes heard it, they followed him on foot from the cities. And when Jesus went out, he saw a great multitude, and he was moved with compassion. And yes, I'm going to carry on. He saw, and he was moved with compassion. This is Jesus speaking. This is Jesus, and this is what Jesus does. And then from there he goes and he feeds the 5,000. We miss the compassion part, don't we? We miss that he saw and he moved and he did. You know what love does? Love your neighbor as yourself. You know what love does? Love moves. Love does. Love doesn't speak. Love does. And I can carry on and I can carry on. Because there are so many pieces of scripture where Jesus moves with compassion. In Matthew 9, verse 35 to 36, Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. But you know what else he had time for? When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them. Why? Because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Oh, church, we serve an incredible God who has time for us, who sees us. In the midst of what he is doing, he stops, he sees, and he has compassion. Yes, he was teaching, preaching, and healing. But you know what he does? He stops and he says, oh, it's all good we're healing, but these guys are lost. My heart breaks for them. I've got compassion for the people who do not have a shepherd. Perhaps you, in that space this morning, do you have a shepherd? Are you helpless? Well, we got a good shepherd. And he sees you. He sees you. He's got compassion for you. He's calling you. And so we need together, church, need to learn an incredible lesson from Jesus. We want to be good Samaritans, or at least try. We need to follow what Jesus did. He had time for people. He saw and he moved. How many of us watch the news? How do we pray for a broken world if you don't watch the news? Oh, you can walk out the doors. Yes, definitely. There's a broken world, yeah. But there's a broken world there. My wife doesn't like me watching the news at all. Every time she comes, the news is on again. And my response has always been love. I don't know what to pray for if I don't see. I can't show compassion if I don't see. Because me seeing should be a space in which I'm like, oh Lord, that breaks my heart, and I'm very sure it breaks yours. Even worse than it breaks my heart, because there is selfishness in my heart. But your heart is for, oh Lord, I'm going to see and I'm going to move, and my move is in prayer. And sometimes that is how we can move, but we need to move. You know what else the Samaritan does? He then moves in love. I'm not going to go through all the points as to what he does, but he moves in love. Because love does. He could have stopped, seen, showed compassion, and thought, well, I'm a Samaritan, that's a Jew, there's robbers around here, maybe another day. No. He goes and he helps. He helps and he stops. And he does. And you know what that calls us to do this morning, first and foremost, is to love your enemies. Because I want you to realize once again, is your neighbor is not your best friend or your good neighbor next door. It's the neighbor behind you who wants to poison your dogs. And so we read, you have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. Love your neighbor and hate your enemy. And when we get to the parable of the Good Samaritan, our enemy is our neighbor. When else have you prayed for your enemy? When else have you loved your enemy or forgiven your enemy? Will you stop and help your enemy on the floor? I've heard a lot of people say, if he's burning, I'll throw petrol. That's what our response is, isn't it? That's the earthly response. But that is not what we are called to do. I used to come home and complain a lot about my boss. My wife says to me, love, when else have you prayed for your boss? I said, I don't pray for him. Says, well, start praying for him. And my wife can now be a testament to tell you that my boss and I are the best of friends now. He phones me on the weekend. Love, what did he phone you for? Oh, no, just to say hello. Just to see how things are going. And listen, I've got other things I need to do. Can we talk on Monday? Prayer changes everything. Moving in love changes everything. I loved him. I showed him a glimpse of Christ's love. I prayed for him. I forgave him. Are we doing that, Samaritans? To the Jew who's on the floor? Because I can guarantee you now, if that Jew was healthy and alive, he would not be seen with that Samaritan at all. Our enemies need to receive the love of Christ. And that's where it begins. If you love the Lord your God with everything that you have, your response would and should be, I'll love my neighbor. And it's not the nice neighbor that we all like. It's my other neighbor that I don't like at all. Just a few last points this morning. Loving your neighbor will cost you time. Time. Loving your neighbor will cost you time. The Samaritan was on his way, and he didn't have time to stop, but he made time to stop. I'm sure he was quite busy. You know, like the priests and the Levites who were on their way to do church things. You know, they also didn't have time. They were also quite busy. And yet Jesus too, he also was busy. He was healing. But he too had time to stop, to love, to show compassion. It's going to cost you time. And it's not your time, church. It's the Lord's time. All the time that you have is not your time, it's the Lord's time. And I pray that we would be using not only for our goodness and for my stuff, but for the work of the Lord, for the work of the kingdom. How much of your time are you giving to those who need Jesus? How much of your time are you stopping and spending with somebody other than just your family? We were instructed to make disciples of all nations, and yet we have the opportunity to do it so freely here. Just to mention Jesus in conversation. But what's it going to cost time? It's going to cost you time to sit and speak to Jesus about somebody. It's going to cost you time this morning to maybe say, I see you. My heart, can I pray for you? Guess what? You're going to be 10 minutes late for lunch this afternoon. But you showed compassion. You saw, you moved, you showed compassion. Perhaps it will cost you money. And yet again, the money that we have is not ours. It's a blessing that we receive from God. Remember that when we talk later. I hear amens. Those ones are... It's not our money. It's the Lord's money. John Wesley once said, if when I die I leave behind 10 pounds, you and all of mankind can bear witness against me that I have died a thief and a robber. If when I die I leave behind 10 pounds, you and all of mankind can bear witness against me that I have died a thief and a robber. Money wasn't a thing. Yes, money is important. I must just say, we need it. But it's not our king and it's not our God. The money that we receive should be used to further the kingdom of God. You know what the Samaritan does? Goes and pays what he has. This is all I have. I'm going to come back a bit later on. Please look after him. When I come back, I'll cover the rest. Just imagine that. Your least likeliest person to stop doesn't just only give time and get his hands dirty, but he gives money and says, I don't have any more, but I'll come back and I'll give you the rest later. Sure. That should pull a string in our hearts, church. I don't have much. This is what I have for now. Please look after him. Please take care of him. Please heal him. When I come back, I'm going to return. I'll give you the balance. Oh. Church, we need to know that loving is going to perhaps cost you money. Money that is not yours. Money that is not mine. And lastly, this morning, loving your neighbor is going to cost you control. We want to have things on our terms, don't we? When we're helping people, there's T's and C's. Always. I'm going to help until this point. Oh, no, do you know what they did with what I gave them? Never. I don't. You have a Samaritan who stops to help a Jew, who goes into a Jewish town, who stops at a Jewish inn to get asked, please can you give me to a Jewish innkeeper. I just want to paint the picture here. You're coming with a person who's beaten, battered, and bruised into a Jewish town, and you are the most hated people there are. They're going to turn around and perhaps say, well, did you do this to him? How did he? He could have been accused for that. But you know what he does? It's okay not to be in control. I'm going to do it anyway. I've called to love, and I'm going to do it anyway. It's going to cost you control. Control of your reputation. Maybe your reputation is going to get a little bit hurt. But church, we got to build character. The Lord is building character. He's not worried about your reputation. He's worried about your character. Do you display His characteristics this morning? And so this morning, church, I pray that we would stop living lives by which we are the priests and the Levites, too busy to go and help those in need, too fixated on what we want and what. I pray that we would stop for a moment. I pray that we would ask to have eyes to see like Jesus does. I pray that we would have a heart filled with compassion like the heart of Christ. I pray that the compassion would lead to us to do and move and do something, to love, Do you all love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your strength, all your soul, with everything that you have? I hope your answer is yes. And your next one is, love your neighbor as you love yourself. When I did the check this morning on loving that neighbor that Jesus is speaking about, I was reminded, Dylan, you obviously don't love yourself that much, because you're not doing to your neighbor as you do to yourself. If you love yourself that much, you need to love your neighbor just as much. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. I pray compassion would make us move. And in us moving, we would be the hands and feet of Jesus in a dark and a broken world, so in desperate need of the love, the mercy, and the grace of Jesus.
I just want